Hello, everyone. Welcome to Game Dev London. I'm your host, Ahmed Al-Badawi, and with me is...
I'm Chris Payne. I run Quantum Soup Studios and I've worked in the games industry for a couple of decades.
Oh, well, there you have it. Cool. So I guess my first question to you, Chris, is how did you get into the industry?
I grew up with video games and knew that I wanted to work in games from a very early age. So I started typing in magazine listings on the CPC 464. But
I
by the
have no
time
idea what that meant.
it's one of the 8-bit machines.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
Alan Sugar's 8-bit machine, in fact. It was a really good
Oh,
one. It was a very good 8-bit. But by the time I popped out of higher education,
yeah.
the industry had developed a little bit. So it had gone
Yeah.
from kind of like 8-bit games where they were done by maybe one or two people to being sort of a decent size. So I got into the industry in '96.
Okay.
And I got lucky, basically. I interviewed a bunch of places. I interviewed with Sony and utterly flunked it. Because they asked me complicated technical questions that I was
Yeah.
not experienced enough to answer. But I also interviewed for a startup, what we would now consider an indie studio, and they asked me less technical questions, and so I got that job. So yeah, that was good. And then after they were working on something really ambitious. It was great. It got canned, unfortunately, but it was going to be a massively multiplayer online adventure.
Okay.
Which
So like a
was kind of cool.
precursor to MMOs, basically,
There
or...
were MMOs around at the time, but it was Ultima Online,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and I think EverQuest had just about launched.
Mm,
So,
mm.
but they were looking to do something that was very narrative driven, but in a
Yes.
massively multiplayer space. So it was, I guess, it was kind of like a cross between Second Life and what's the conspiracy theory one? I can't remember.
A conspiracy theory.
Yeah,
I
there's a
don't
conspiracy
know.
theory MMO called like The Secret or something. I can't
The
remember.
Secret Worlds.
Secret World, that's the one. Yes.
Don't know why I know
Um, yep.
that.
Well done. So that was an interesting looking project, but unfortunately, they really were biting off more than they could chew, and so like they pivoted away
Yeah.
from games and into animation. So I jumped ship to Electronic Arts, which
Oh.
was cool. So I worked there for a little while, but unfortunately, I was working on Football Manager games, and I don't
Mm.
really know a lot about football. So they, I tried to learn about football,
Yeah.
but yeah, I didn't really grok it. So they moved me off the match AI after after the first project, moved me
Mm.
on to UI and stuff like that, and so it was interesting. But I really wanted to be working on the stuff that Bullfrog were working on upstairs in the same building at that time.
I
Um,
recognize the name.
Yeah, they were working on Dungeon Keeper 2 and Populous 3 at that time, and a bunch of other interesting projects that never saw the light of day. So it was shortly before we started getting the Lionhead satellite studios
Yes.
all departing Bullfrog and so on. So that was interesting. But then I moved on from EA because it was obvious I wasn't going to get to move off of Football Manager and onto the cool projects. So
Mm-hmm.
then where did I go? Then it was Intelligent Games worked on an RTS called Emperor Battle for
Yes.
Dune, which was really fun. That was an interesting one, and it was first proper 3D RTS. Up until then,
Yeah.
they was even like Red Command and Conquer, Red Alert was all still done with sprites. And
Oh.
then I got sick of commuting into London because
I
it
can
was
appreciate that.
it was quite a trek. So I looked for somewhere out in the countryside and moved to Traveller's Tales a year or two before they landed the Lego license.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and then 15 years on, I was finally bored of Lego games because I'd done all of my favorite IPs by then, and I decided it was time to actually start my own studio. So I did.
Nice. That so like now you're well situated within like quantum soup and doing what you want to do. Now
Yeah,
basically.
well, to a certain extent. The interesting thing I found when I did finally start my own studio
Hmm.
is that all of the things where you think, oh, I'll be my own boss, I'll be in charge, I can make all the decisions.
Yeah.
Turns out that like reality still has deadlines. You still have shows. You still have like milestones to hit. You still have
Yeah.
limitations of time and money that you have to work within, even when you're making all the decisions yourself. So
Yeah.
it's it's different, but in some ways you still have the same sort of constraints. But
Yeah.
it was really interesting though. The fun thing about starting my own studio I found was
Yeah.
actually getting out and meeting other people in the industry. So
Hmm.
going to Gamescom and GDC and not just pitching my project, but also talking to peers and getting to know other people who are working on similar games or wildly different
Mm.
games, or just something that caught my eye, or people working on tools and so on. And
Yeah.
I discovered that I really enjoyed that whole networking side of meeting people that you wouldn't otherwise get to talk to. Because certainly when I worked at TT, I spent
Yeah.
15 years basically socializing entirely with the same group of people. I mean, largely because TT was by then a big studio full of amazingly talented people, and
Yeah.
the, so I didn't feel like I was missing anything. Uh, but it's been really interesting talking to people who've had lots of different experiences of different scales of studio and so on. As part
Yeah.
of keeping the studio going, I've also had to do a bit of work for hire, which has been really exciting. But actually got to work on site with a bunch of studios, done remote
Mm.
work for some other studios, worked on all sorts of varied games, little indie games and bigger VR games and stuff. And it's really broadened my experience significantly in a very short space of time because they were mostly
Yeah.
quite short contracts. So that
Yeah.
was really valuable.
Cool. No, that's fascinating to hear. So, have you found that a lot of indie studios have like, I'd say not just purely indie studios, but a lot of like smaller studios generally have to diversify kind of the work that they do in order to survive and manage on their own? Or have you seen studios survive purely doing game development as they wish, sort of thing?
Yeah, I would not claim to be an expert on it.
That's,
Um,
I mean,
I've,
yeah.
I've just, I've, you know, I've had to do some work for hire.
Mm,
I
mm,
That was originally that was basically I was forced to because I run out of other funding. So it was
yeah,
kind of like
yeah.
it was a case of either like fold the studio or take on some
Mm,
work for hire. I'm lucky as a programmer; it's
yeah.
pretty easy to get work for hire because
Mm, mm.
programmers are in demand. So that put me in pretty strong position for doing that.
So
And
Vogue.
yeah, and it turned out to be really valuable in terms of
Yeah,
like I learned a lot. I worked with a lot of different tools and platforms, different people, different size organizational structures, and so on.
yeah,
Um, so I don't know. I think working for hire is always probably safer because you're basically getting paid by somebody to do some work. It's a bit
yeah,
more predictable and so on. If you're actually working on a project, you don't necessarily know whether it's going to cover its development costs when it finally does ship.
yeah.
And it very much depends on whether you can market it properly or whether you can get
Mm,
a publishing partner to help you market it properly. Uh,
yeah.
but there's got to be some marketing. I did ship a side project with minimal
Hmm.
marketing, and it completely tanked.
Ah.
But it was useful experience of actually pushing something out to Steam and itch, and
Yeah.
experiencing it shipped, for example, with a crash bug if you didn't already have a save game.
Yeah, that's a
that
problem sometimes.
was that was a problem. I was not aware of that because I had a
Yeah,
save game.
Yeah.
None of my customers had a save game though, so that was one where I was up at 2 a.m. fixing the save. I mean, it was a simple fix, but yeah, it was just, again, that's the problem of not having a decent QA team. I was just testing it myself and pushed it out there. That's very, very seat of the pants.
Yeah, I mean, like from a lot of the advice I've heard, having that first, at least like having a first project that you get to ship is such a valuable learning experience, and it sounds like that was very much the
Yeah,
same.
I mean, even with 20-something shipped games under my belt, doing one on my own where
Yeah,
it was all down to me and I had to
yeah.
do everything, and that's how I learned that I suck at marketing. And frankly, I just, I could learn the whole marketing side of things,
Mm,
but it would take time away from all of the other things that I need to do,
yeah,
and I'm not particularly, it's just not my it's not my existing skill set. I'm not particularly excited about making it my skill set. I would rather
yeah.
work with someone who is genuinely good at it and enthusiastic about it.
Hi guys, Stuart DeVille here from Game Dev London. Thanks for watching that clip of the Game Dev London podcast. If you visit our website, gamedev.london, you will find links to all of the places you can listen to the full version of that episode. You can also find information about our live events, our Twitch streams, our game jams, our competitions and more. And why not, come and join us in our Discord. Hit subscribe and follow us for more clips like this. All links will be in the description below. Thanks again and see you soon.